So I want to call upon Ryan to come up. We are going now panel discussion. We're just going to have 2 questions for the 2 of you guys, and then 1 question from the audience, unless otherwise this is because of time. Straight away, I'll remain here, Ryan, don't worry to sit alone there. Michael, are you still with us? Michael?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm still with you.
Yeah, we can hear you very well. I'm just going to go through 2 questions only, and you'll have a hint on them, as well as Ryan will also have a hint on them. But like I said, most of those questions were answered in your presentation. You just have to re-echo them for people to digest this. The first question goes that in the morning here, we had Dr. Msenero, she was very audible when it came to moving from the knowledge science to product science. So we wanted to know some of the products that science can really put out there to attract investors such that they can have funding. I don't know whether you get me clearly, Mike, on this. I can rephrase it if you're not getting me right.
So what the question was what products are some of the companies, what is an attractive solution? What problems are people solving for investors to invest in a Synbio or a biotech company?
Exactly, 100%. Now, another question. I'm putting them at the same time, such that we go one by one. The second question to you guys, Michael and Ryan. What opportunities do we have out there in support of synthetic biology and of course research at large? This question also came out clearly from Dr. Margaret Karebu. She was also talking about the same question on how people can actually, and even in Africa, not of course looking outside Africa, how do science convince people in Africa? Because government coffers have money. Dr. Msenero told us that. But somehow, somewhere, they are, I think, not convinced due to some factors. So combining it on that, you're also going to give us some of your take on this. Like, good enough, I've seen slides talking about this. Then I think before we go to our audience, let me first give the opportunity to our discussants to give their take on this as we digest. I'll start with Ryan, just with us here.
Yeah, sure. Alex, I'll start, and I do want to hear from Mike too, though, so I'll be brief. But I think I'll take the first question on the products question. You know, when we hear someone ask about products, I like to point to this report that came out in 2020.Maybe you've seen it from McKinsey. It says, I think it's called the Bio Revolution or something like that. And they have a statistic in there. They have a statistic about the size of the bio revolution, sort of quote-unquote bioeconomy, in the next 10 or 20 years, something like $4 to $5 trillion global bio revolution, sort of global economic output. But what's really interesting in this report are 2 other numbers next to that. One number is this sort of assessment that up to 60%, and you should check my numbers, but the sentiment is right. Up to 60% of the physical inputs into the global economy could be made with biology. So up to 60% of the physical inputs into the global economy could be made using biology. And the could is sort of obviously dependent on the tools and the cost of tools. I mean, it has to make commercial sense to make those things with biology versus something else, traditional methods or so on. But that's changing. We are seeing that happening. The tools are, and we saw the trend lines from Mike, that it is becoming more and more practical to make things with biology, and it's possible to make lots of things using biology, and that's exciting. The other number that they have in there, and I'll wrap up, is in addition to that 60% of the physical inputs can be made with biology, the uptake of biology is highly dependent on social acceptance. So it's not just about the tools and the economic opportunity. It's the opportunity and the economic transformation is contingent on social acceptance. And so that's a very important kind of consideration for us as we think through not just the technology, but caring how the technology is used and making sure that we're being mindful and careful as we move forward. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you very much, Ryan, on that. I'll also have Michael to give us his take on that before we move to the next question, digestion.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Ryan. I could just only echo what Ryan has been saying. Many people are talking about the climate change being one of the largest economic drivers that we have seen as a global economy, sort of for a very, very long time. If you think about climate change, and you think about what we need to do to prevent climate change from happening like it could happen, a large part of that is going to be by us reimagining our economy and re-engineering biology to do the things that we have done in the past, using petroleum, using chemicals, using other sorts of synthetic type of things. Really, we sit at a time where you have this nexus of a technology explosion, us understanding what we can do with technology like biology, and the massive need of having to transform our food systems, having to transform our healthcare systems, having to transform our chemical systems and our material systems across the world. This is all going to change. And this is why it's so exciting to actually follow companies like Ginkgo Bioworks, who are at the forefront of this change. So for people in the audience, if you want to get inspiration around what is happening, what sort of products you should be looking to build, what solutions the world needs, what opportunities there are, you just need to follow Ginkgo Bioworks and see all the press releases that are released from Ginkgo, the companies that they're partnering with to produce new forms of molecules that are really going to be part of this transformation that we're going through. So it really is a time of massive opportunity if you are someone who's playing in the life sciences. So this is why a finance guy is focusing on this right now myself. So I'm very, very excited about the future and about the potential of what we can do with the tools that we have.
Much, Michael. I think you've all heard. You see, we have to use this gentleman around, Ginkgo Bioworks. You got the profile very well, and Michael has also mentioned it very well when it comes to products. And one thing that Ryan talked about, the social acceptance, somehow people have not yet bought this particular when you talk about synthetic biology and the fear of GMOs and other things in that line. So you have to come as a community, science community, to explain why people shouldn't fear. Of course, probably the government can come in and dig in their coffers to fund most of this research. So take home point, social acceptance. This is something we need to take light. So going on the second question, now I want to start with Michael. I believe you still have my question. the last area that you give us your take. We shall also come to Ryan on the same, then we can go to the audience. Thank you.
Sorry, Alex, what was the second question? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Second question was still on the opportunities, just like Margaret Kalebu mentioned. The opportunities, what opportunities do we have out there? Of course, you talked about the products. Now we are talking about the opportunities. Of course, people have very many science researchers. They want to know how best to win these grants. You find so many people write these grants, and to be honest, there is somehow somewhere they have failed on maybe trials. You know, someone would say that dead on arrival. Yet when you dig deeply there, someone has a concept that really needs to go ahead, but because of the funding, it is missing. So we want you to give us your take on such opportunities. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the important things, if you're a life scientist or looking for opportunities, you need to look at the world and look where you see problems in the world. Our world is faced with loads of problems, and one of them is climate change. So how, if you are focused in that sort of area, how can you make an impact in climate change? Well, one of the things you can do is you can be part of this movement which is looking to transform our food systems. If you think about from an agricultural point of view, factory farming is problematic on multiple fronts. One of them being these ethical considerations around factory farming, and the other one is around the climate change. What cattle or rearing meat does to the climate. Energy in versus energy out, you lose so much energy. So if you follow companies in the US, and I know Ginkgo is working with a few of them, they're part of creating cultivated meat. So cultivated meat is stem cells making meat in the laboratory effectively. And the other one is plant-based. And some of you might have come across companies like the Impossible or Beyond that are making burgers that taste very, very close to a beef burger using plants. So that's one area. Now, other areas are around materials. There's a company based in the US as well called Bulb Threads. And what they are doing is they have sequenced the gene that relates to spider silk, okay? And they've now then inserted that into yeast and are effectively brewing silk as you would brew beer, using precision fermentation, which is a technology that is also going to revolutionize the world. And this is something obviously Ryan would understand far better than I have, because it's one of Ginkgo's specialities. The healthcare sector is also particularly interesting. But what I would encourage people in the audience to do is look around the world and look in your areas and look where there are problems, and then relate your skills that you have to those potential problems. But it's very, very important when you are looking to build something, there needs to be a problem out there. You need to be solving a specific problem. And when you're solving a problem, you'll be making the world better, but at the same time, it'll enable you to raise funding to actually pursue that pursuit.
Thank you very much, Michael. Ryan, on your take on this?
Yeah, and first, Michael, thank you for being so gracious to Ginkgo. We should bring you everywhere. I think but I will say, just on the opportunities piece, you know, we're seeing right now, I think, one of the world's sort of biggest demand signals for biotechnology than we've ever seen, and that's around COVID-19 response. And what I think there's a kind of a moment where politicians and policymakers and investors and development funders and so on may realize over time that they've may have over-indexed towards pandemic preparedness and response. And by the way, there's a lot more we need to all be investing in those issues, but we might see that over the coming years they realize maybe we don't need this particular type of factory all the time. and so on, it might be a real opportunity for us to connect the work that we do and connect the bioeconomy to biosecurity and say, I see you want to build vaccine manufacturing. Well, did you know with that same type of facility and with a very similar workforce, you can start doing things for food security and for new materials and for environmental remediation, and that, you know, and that also gives you a warm base to better respond to a future pandemic too. And there's a sort of a very symbiotic relationship between a bioeconomy and better biosecurity. We always said in pandemics, we always said, well, it's panic and neglect, panic and neglect. Well, a strong bioeconomy is neglect-resistant pandemic preparedness. If you have a bunch of facilities, you have a bunch of workers, and you're ready to go, if you have a detection of a threat, you can pivot that bioeconomy to respond to a pandemic really effectively. So tying ourselves to that agenda and shifting that agenda to serve other causes, I think is a really fantastic opportunity all over the world, but I think also including here.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And one last question, and I want Ivy to give us this question with the interest of time. Okay. And then our panelists will help us answer it. Thank you very much, Ivy.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Just to keep this short, I'll just give the last question. This is the audience question. This is to both Ryan and Michael. After listening to the biosafety and biosecurity landscape we have in Africa, as investors, how do you deal, and to Michael, how have you dealt with the risk involved in these investment ventures? And a follow-up will be, what contribution do you think you can add on to bettering our situation here in Africa? Thank you.
We can start with Michael still. I think you had that slide there.
Just for a second, Alex, could you just repeat that for me?
I am so sorry, I talk quite fast at times. But the question was, after listening to the biosafety and biosecurity landscape we have here in Africa, how have you been dealing, for you, Michael, how have you been dealing with the risks involved in investing in such ventures? And how do you think you can contribute to help better the situation such that we can have more products coming out of Africa?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's twofold. So I'm going to start with your second part second. It's building an investment climate that is sustainable to build, or is appropriate to build sustainable in biotech or Synbio companies is a very, very important part of the equation. And that's a macro, all-inclusive, all hands on deck type of approach. So it involves the private sector, it involves venture funds, it involves government, it involves universities. You've really got to get these different stakeholders working together to support the emergence of an ecosystem. And it's with that, the development of the ecosystem, you're likely to have success. One of the first part of the question was, how do you deal with the risk of building startup companies or biotech or Synbio companies? And the answer to that, given the stage of development of many of our economies in the continent, we have to be very strategic when we think about the markets that we're going to be serving. And it's very important, because our markets still are underdeveloped and they're still relatively small, we need to be thinking global on day one. So and the idea is, can we use some of the competitive advantages we have on this African continent to build internationally relevant companies? And we have some competitive advantages. Humanity originated in Africa. We have the most diverse human genome in the world sitting here on the African continent. And that is a very, very valuable asset. Are there ways in which we can use that natural resource to do things like drug discovery here in Africa, or partner with international drug discovery companies that whereby we could work with that natural advantage? Many of our biomes here are unique. I know specifically in the Cape region where I'm from, we have a very unique plant biome here, and there's lots of rich diversity within that biome that you won't have in other parts of the world? Can we use that to discover new antimicrobials, new enzymes, various new sorts of products? So the critical thing here is to build companies that are internationally relevant, but try and use the local knowledge, the local competitive advantages we have based on our continent.
Thank you very much, Michael. Ryan, what is your take on this?
Yeah, the questions on investing in, I'm afraid I don't have a lot of expertise on investing in companies. I don't think.
Okay, it's understood. Most of the slide, Michael, I was so much interested in the slides Michael projected there, and I believe most of these questions, we have the answers there. We just need to get the slides and digest it. So with that, I want to thank our discussant panelists. Ryan, you can have your seat, and also thank you all. We shall have a parting word before we leave. I want to call up the Ivy. Kindly come, and then we get to the last part of this. Thank you very much.